Hello everyone. Before we start with the talk, let us all meet Julie. Julie is an Android engineer at XYZ company and she is working on the ABC TV mobile application. So, Julie has worked on this mobile application from scratch, and as you know, in mobile application, we have long running tasks when we make a network call or when we make a database call. So, we cannot have synchronous execution for those because if we maintain synchronous execution with IO operations as well, then in that case, the our UI will continue waiting till the long running operation completes and the UI will become non-responsive. It will result in ENRs and the app lagging as well. So Julie started writing the asynchronous execution using RX Java library, and now she's using RX Kotlin. But she's facing like a lot of challenges. So she has come up to talk about her challenges. First is when she's using RX, she sees that. In this library there is lot of there are a lot of callbacks and because of that the code is not quite straightforward to understand, and as a dev she needs to take care of disposing of the subscriptions, otherwise they will result in memory leaks. So to avoid all this, Julie just goes through the Google IO Talk videos, and she comes across this new Kotlin ways of asynchronous execution, that is Kotlin coroutines, and she starts learning about them and she starts using them in her code. So as she starts exploring coroutines, um, she sees that with Kotlin coroutines, we use suspend functions, which can be called from other suspend functions or from coroutine. So because of suspend functions and coroutines being lightweight threads, the scheduling part actually in coroutines isn't handled by the OS as it was in RX. It is handled by the Kotlin runtime, and internally when she looks at the code for the suspend functions, she finds that internally they are using callbacks. They use the continuation callback. But for as a developer, like there is less boilerplate code, and because we write sequential code for asynchronous operations as well, it the code is actually easier to understand. And she also notices one more thing, which is the problem of memory leaks, which you are getting with RX if we actually miss to dispose of our subscriptions. Here, coroutines can be tied to scopes, and they can be disposed when the scope gets destroyed. So in our applications, we can use three types of scopes. That is, we can use global scope, which is application scope. We can use lifecycle scope, which is lifecycle scope, be it the lifecycle of our UI controller like activity or fragment, or we can use this view model scope. So it's like if we are using coroutines in view model with the view model scope, when the view model gets destroyed, all the coroutines which are present in that view model, they too get destroyed. So the developer need not handle the disposing of themselves. So Julie started exploring these Kotlin coroutines, and she also looked at this feature. This part of Kotlin coroutines where we have dispatchers, and we have three kinds of dispatcher: the IO, the main dispatcher, and the default dispatcher. IO dispatcher, like for your input output long running operations; main dispatcher for performing coroutines onto the main thread or UI thread, and your default dispatcher. So she starts actually refactoring her RX code into coroutines. So here you can see we have this API where interface where we are actually telling about the API methods and the results. With the endpoints as well. So with the coroutines, when we write the same code, you can see that here we have our functions and we have converted them to suspend functions here. So as I told, that coroutines uses this concept of suspend functions, where functions say that particular task gets suspended and gets run later. And they are lightweight, so they run on different, they can run on different threads. And actually the Kotlin runtime determines like which task should run when. So the Kotlin runtime handles the scheduling part and not the OS. So coming to the network call, here you can see with the Rx, when we write this code in our view model, we are actually making a call, a network call, and after that we use the subscribe on, observe on to handle the IO operation on a different thread, and the UI updates on a different thread. And then in the on cleared, which you can see in the end, here we are actually clearing the disposable. So it is the developer's job to actually clear the disposable. If we miss clearing the disposable, it will result in memory leaks. So we look at the same code in with our Kotlin coroutines. So here you can see we use this view model scope, and we use a launch coroutine, and we make a network call, and then we update the UI with the result. And here we don't have this anything to clear, because the moment the view model gets destroyed, the coroutines also get destroyed with them. So Julie has been liking this new library a lot, but she has come to a conclusion that coroutines is just the scheduler part of RX. Like in RX, apart from handling having these schedulers, we also had a lot of operators which used to handle the stream and modify the stream. We don't have that in coroutines, and with suspend functions, we actually return a single value. So, what does Julie do is she thinks that coroutines alone cannot actually replace the RX in her code. So she goes to Google and she asks them that, Google, just tell me that if you have brought this, if you are actually wanting people to adopt Kotlin and use Kotlin, and you have introduced coroutines, then what should I use with coroutines to completely get rid of RX? So with the increasing adaptability, with Google's intention of increasing the adaptability of Kotlin, and making using it as a first class language in Android, Google certainly has something in mind to get rid of RX. So here enters the hero of the movie, that is Kotlin Flow. So, welcome everyone to this session on Let's Go with Kotlin Flow. I am Monica, and I'll be taking you through this session where we'll be getting an overview of Kotlin Flow, how it can be created, how it can be consumed, how you can use it in various scenarios in your Android application, how you can test Kotlin Flow, and what are the good reads on Kotlin Flow. So before we start with the session, I want to talk a bit about myself. Who am I? So I am an Android engineer currently working at Walmart Global Tech India. I have 6.5 years of experience, and I am from India. I am a chef, reader, writer, speaker. So as much as I love to cook code, I love to cook recipes as well. And I'm present on Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you have any questions after this talk on Kotlin Flow, then feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. So, as I told you that Kotlin coroutines cannot alone replace RX. So Kotlin plus Flow can replace RX. So, coroutines plus Flow can replace RX. So coroutines is basically your one-shot operations, and Flow is multi-shot operations. So here with coroutines plus Flow, we get everything of every functionality of RX. That is the scheduler part, the operators handling a single stream as well as multi-stream. So moving on to why Flow, like what are the benefits of Flow? So Flow offers null safety, like there'll be no null values in the stream. It has plethora of operators, like it has Like Rx has a lot of operators for handling various things like zip map, flat map, filter. So similarly, Flow has all these operators, and you can perform common operations like filtering, your search operation using debounce. Everything you can perform with Flow as well. And Flow handles back pressure directly. For those who have worked in Rx, you might be remembering that in Rx Java 1 we had observable to handle back pressure, and in Rx Java 2 we had flowable to handle back pressure. But with Flow, it handles it directly. It handles it automatically. Flow is cold, meaning Flow will emit only when there is a subscriber to consume the value. It will only generate the value when there is some subscriber. If there is no subscriber to it, it won't emit the value. And Flow actually is interoperable with coroutines and reactive streams. So it actually uses, it can be launched from coroutines, it can be used from coroutines, and it uses coroutines under the hood. And Flow supports multi-platform also. So as I mentioned that Google has introduced Kotlin as first class language, and it wants to increase the adoptability of Kotlin in the Android developer community, and that's why coroutines came into picture for handling asynchronous operations in your Kotlin code, and now Flow. So and Kotlin multi-platform also got introduced few years back, where you can write common code in Kotlin and get it create your apps in both Android and iOS. So Kotlin Flow supports Kotlin multi-platform because it also uses coroutines and Kotlin. RX Java won't be able to support that. So this is also one of the plus point of Kotlin Flow, like why it should be used. Because as you know, as Google announced in Google I/O 2019, that 50% of the Android apps are migrated to Kotlin. So this will continue, and there'll be increasing adoptability of Kotlin in the developer community. So this is one of the another point which facilitates the adoptability of Flow as well. So, moving on to what is Flow. So, Flow is just a stream of data, and it can emit multiple values sequentially, and it can be computed asynchronously, and also it emits values of the same data type. So let us have a look at how we can build flows. So we can build flows through various operators. First is flow off. So like in your Rx Java, we had this operator just operator, where in just we used to supply stream of numbers or strings, and we used to just convert the values into an observable. So here we have a flow off operator, where you supply stream of numbers or strings and it gets converted to flow. And the second operator is as flow. So this is an basically an extension function. Here you supply, you actually tell your receiver first, and on your receiver you call the as flow. So here I want the numbers from range 1 to 5 to be a flow. So I'm using as flow. So with both the statements written here, I get flows created. Third way is using a flow block. So here you can see I have a flow block, and I want for each of the numbers 0 to 10 to be emitted. So as I said, like flow actually works on this emit and subscribe pattern. So it emits a stream of values, and there's a collector who actually collects it or consumes it. So here we are emitting a range of numbers from 0 to 10. This is one of the ways like how you can create a flow. And the last way how you can create a flow is like channel flow. Like here I'm basically sending the values, and there is one more way which is known as callback flow, which is actually used to convert your callback based code into a flow. So these are few ways using which you can actually build the flow. And now we come to a point of consuming the flow, because as I said that flows are cold, they do not emit until there is a consumer. So for consuming the flow, we have certain terminal operators. There are two terminal operators which you will come across. First is collect and second is reduce. So coming to collect operator, as its name suggests, it collects the flow. So here you can see that we have in the first statement, we are actually creating a flow from range of numbers 1 to 5, and then we are filtering that range. So filter and map are also operators which you are applying onto the flow, but they are intermediate operators. So what are intermediate operators? They are operators which modify the flow, but they do not consume it. So you can use a chain of such operators, like here we are using chain of filter and map operator. So they'll actually modify the flow stream, but they won't consume it. So we'll have a range of numbers 1 to 5, we'll convert it into flow, then we'll perform a filter on it, and we'll filter out those values. We'll filter out those values which are not divisible by 2, and once we get the result, we'll map it. That is, in map we'll make a square of it, and then we want a collector. So we have this collect operator which collects the flow stream, and then it simply prints it. So collect operator consumes your flow stream, and there is one more operator which consumes your flow stream, that is reduce operator. So here you can see we have this range of numbers from 1 to 5, we convert it into a flow, and then we use this reduce operator wherein we collect the result. So here what happens is, in the result we get the result 15. Reason is we have this 1 to 5, we convert it into flow, we get a flow stream, and then for each of the values we apply a function on each value. So it's like 1 and 2, you apply a function, you get 3. Then you have 3 and 3, you apply a function, you get 6. Then you have 6 and 4, which comes to 10. Then you have 10 and 5, which comes to 15. So here you actually collect the stream, but you also apply a function on it. So moving on to the next part, like how you can get started with using Flow in your Android apps. So you need to include Kotlin X coroutines, core, and Android dependencies. And the Kotlin Gradle plugin, which you should use, is 1.3.61 or above. And once you have this set up, so this is the architecture diagram which I've taken from Android developer site, guide to app architecture. So this is the suggested architecture by Google, wherein we should have the UI controller activity of fragment calling the view model, and which in turn calls the repository, and repository either connects to our database or it connects to a remote data source. So here we Google has suggested to use MVVM and Jetpack view model and live data for having this kind of an architecture. So how will the app architecture look with Flow, and where and all can Flow fit? So when you use Flow, you can use the same architecture as suggested by Google. Here, when you have your data source, be it your remote data source, or be it your database, here you can wrap it as Flow. Now you can do two things. Either you can wrap it as Flow here, or you can just have a normal return type as you have. And in your repository, you need to wrap the returned value as Flow. The reason being, your repository will perform the long running operation and return the stream as a flow, and your view model will collect it. So either you can actually have your flow, your return type wrapped as flow in data source and then use it in your repository, or you can have your normal return type in data source and create a flow in your repository. So your repository will actually query your data source, and be it your remote data source or local database, and it will perform the call, and it will emit the stream, it will emit the flow stream, and view model will be calling the repository. So in there was a suggestion given by Google, is what was it was actually to use, not to use live data in the repository, but use it in the view model. So reason was that we use live data and view model so that UI controller can observe that live data and get the UI updates, but it should not be live data shouldn't be in the repository, and view model should be observing it. So for this purpose, we have flow in our repository, and the view model basically makes call to the repository method. It gets the flow stream, it collects it, and then either we can use live data, we can update the live data values and then propagate it to our UI layer, or we can maintain a state flow, and that state flow, once the state updates, it can actually be collected in the UI. So in your view model layer, you can use either live data or flow. So moving on to the first scenario, which is connecting to network. So here I'm connecting to. I'm actually using this. I'm creating a popular movies application where I'm making a network call for popular movies. So here I've kept the return type as my normal return type, the list of movie, and you can see here in the repository, I'm using the data source, I'm making the call, and once I get the result, I use the map operator, and I'm using a flow. So you can see I'm actually building the flow using the flow block. And once I get the value returned, I perform the map operator and I emit the flow stream. And you can see here this operator which is flow on. So coming back to this app architecture thing, so if your view model is making call to the repository and collecting the flow on say your view model scope on your main dispatcher, in that case your repository operation will also happen on the main dispatcher. So if you want your repository operation to not happen on your main dispatcher, which you should definitely, you need to use this flow on operator so that your API call gets executed on the IO dispatcher. So you should not execute your network or database calls on the actually your main dispatcher. So to change the dispatcher and to use a different dispatcher at the emission site, we use this flow on operator. And as you know that in RX we used to use the subscribe on, which used to actually execute the observable code on a certain scheduler. So flow on is equivalent to your subscribe on. It works on the flow code, the emission code, and it performs it on a certain dispatcher, and it doesn't work on your collection code. So it will work on this code which you write at the emission site. So moving on to the view model. So as I said, the view model will be calling your repository method. So here we are seeing that view model is calling the repository method, and then it repository method gives a flow type. So here we are collecting the flow and we are populating the live data. So you can see we have this movie's live data. We are populating it with the flow stream. And as you can see that we are launching the flow inside a coroutine. The moment the coroutine gets the view model gets destroyed, the coroutine gets destroyed, and hence the flow will also get destroyed. So we as developers need not take the headache of actually disposing of the subscriptions. So moving on to handling exceptions. So flow can either return your successful result, or it can return an exception. So if you use this piece of code and if there's some exception, you will get a crash. So you should handle the exception. So that can be handled with the help of catch. So here you can see that I'm catching the exception with the catch operator. And in the catch also you can emit values, like if you want, in case of exception, you want to emit empty string, or you want to populate live data with empty string or something like that, you can do that as well, or you can even emit flow from catch. um, and I'll be talking about that later in the talk. So you can see that when there's an exception, the control comes inside catch, and when there's a successful response, the control comes inside the collect block. So moving on to connecting to the database. So connecting to the database will follow similar architecture as I told before. But again, as I mentioned, in your data source, it's like your call whether you want a regular type, and in your repository you want to create a flow, or when you want to have it at the data source side, there only you want the return type to be mapped as flow, so that in your repository you can clearly perform the flow operations, like directly perform the flow operations. So moving on to the state flow concept. So as its name suggests, state flow stores the state. It is hot, meaning that even if there are no subscribers to it, it will keep on emitting values, and if there are no subscribers, those values will go waste. And it is observable, means we can keep on observing the values. And also state flow returns the last value and not the previous ones. So moving on to how you can use state flow. So since I mentioned that it stores the state and it is an observable, so you can correlate it with live data, that is also an observable data holder. So basically the purpose of live data is we keep live data in view model and we update them with the latest values in view model. And once the values get updated, the live data are observed by UI. So once the values get updated, those updated values are propagated to the UI. So we can use state flow for that purpose. Now, as we have live data which is immutable and mutable live data, similarly we have the same case with state flow as well. State flow is immutable, whereas mutable state flow is mutable. So here you can see in my view model, I have a mutable state flow, and here I'm making the repositories the call to that repository method which returns a flow. And on start is again another method it is another operator where basically when you start the network call, you can perform any operations, like you can have your progress bar, loading state, or you can have your live data which maintains the loading state, error state, or finish state. So here you can update that particular live data. So here you can see that we are making the call to repository method, and once we get the successful result in the collect method, we are changing the value of the mutable state flow. And there is this method where we get the movies, it returns the state flow. So we'll have the UI which will be here you have the flow, and we'll have the UI which will be collecting this particular flow. So because you have this get movies which returns a state flow, like a state flow actually is a kind of subject. It can collect values as well as it is collectible. So here you can see in this load movies method, it is collecting the values. And from this get movies method, I'll show you this get movies is being used in the UI. There it is being collected by the UI. So here comes the UI where we are using this lifecycle scope in our UI controller, and we call this view model method get movies. So get movies is this last method where we get the state flow response. So here we make the view model method call and we collect the value. So we are collecting the state flow here, and here we are collecting the state flow, and like we are not the return type of this method, we are not keeping it as mutable state flow because we don't want the UI to manipulate the state flow. We just want the UI to consume the state flow. So we collect the state flow, we check the status. If it's successful, then whatever value we get from the state flow, we pass it on to the adapter to render it. And if it's loading, we change the progress bar. We make it visible. If it's error, we actually show the error dialog and make the progress bar gone. So this is how, with the help of state flow, we achieve the same thing which we get with live data. And apart from this, we actually have, like, live data supports transformation. Similarly, state flow as well does. So moving on to flow binding. So with RX, we had this concept of RX binding, wherein for UI widgets, we used to turn callbacks on these UI widgets into the RX types. And it was developed by Jake Wharton. So with Flow, we have this Flow binding APIs, which are for Android platform UI widgets, and they basically turn callbacks. They are extension functions which actually turn callbacks on these widgets into a flow type. So suppose when a button is clicked, so we assume that when we use it with flow binding APIs, we assume that button click is a event stream. So we handle it that way, and we can perform operations also on it. So instead of writing the button particular button dot set on click listener, we handle it with flow binding APIs. We assume that it's an event stream. We use the flow binding operators to for handling the click event as well. So to get started with flow binding, we need to include this dependency. And after that, here you can see like how we can handle button clicks with flow binding. Like we can simply get the button using find view by ID, and then we can use this clicks method. So clicks method is provided by the flow binding API, and we consider the button clicks as a stream now, and then we can manipulate the stream using any of the flow operators. So here we are using on each. So if you remember when I was explaining you about the flow builder, there in the when I was explaining about the flow block and how you can create a flow with it, there also we were using for each, on each, like these operators. So we can use the same here, because when you use this clicks, which is part of your flow binding APIs, and now that you have a flow, you can perform any of the flow operations on it. So on each is one, like you specify basically on each button click like what you want to do. So you can show a toast or do whatever, open a page, like you can do whatever operation you want to. And then you specify launch in UI scope. So this launch in is actually equivalent to your scope dot launch, and basically your flow dot collect. So it actually means that you are collecting your flow inside a coroutine, and here you are launching it in UI scope. So you can launch it in lifecycle scope, your UI scope. Like this, you can launch in different scopes, and launching is actually a shorthand for your scope dot launch flow dot collect. So again, you are creating a flow inside a coroutine, and you are performing multiple operations on it. So similarly, your flow binding, like you have this clicks method. Similarly, flow bindings has support for your view pager 2, for your navigation, recycler view, and for the other widgets as well. So now moving on to search example. So search is a common use case which we have in many apps, and with RX Java also we used to perform this search efficiently. So now here you can see that because I said that Stateflow is observable data holder, and it acts like a subject, it is subject equivalent of RX Java. So here you can see in search, whenever we have this search use case, we normally track the state of the edit text or search view, like whatever user has typed. So to observe that state, we used to use subjects in RX Java. Here we use state flow, and we observe the uh, query which is there in that search view at that current point. So the moment the user changes the query, we actually update the state flow, mutable state flow, and we perform different operations on it. Like we don't want the search API call to get triggered every 1/10 of a second. So we want it to be triggered like after 300 milliseconds. So we use the debounce to trigger it after a certain interval. If no operation has happened, or if no change has happened in that certain interval, then we trigger that call. We use filter, wherein we only perform operation on the text, wherein we only make the network call actually when the query is not empty. When it is empty, we update the result as empty, and we want only distinct for only distinct distinct types, like distinct text. the data network call to happen, not for like all the text. So suppose if user type like ABC and later they remove C and then they type ABC, they are C again. So we don't want the network call to get triggered twice. That is why we use distinct until change. And flat map latest, so that way we get the latest query result and not the previous one. So then in this data from network, we actually make the network call with the help of flow. And if there is some error, we catch it in catch, and then we emit the empty flow. So here you can see we are in catch, we are using emit all, and we are emitting an empty flow. So we are creating flow using flow of operator, supplying an empty string and returning an empty flow. And then we perform all this computation, that is debounce, filter, and distinct until change, flat map latest on the default dispatcher, and then we collect it and we update the result text. So this is how the common search use case, which we used to do with RxJava earlier, and optimized search, we can achieve the same thing with Kotlin Flow as well. So you can see the same operators which you used to use there, we have it here as well. So moving on to testing Kotlin Flow. So you need to use this Kotlin coroutines test dependency. And you need to use run blocking test scope, so that you can have that you can have that scope, and in that you can execute keep your, like when suppose if you are testing the repository which actually does the network call, and also that coroutines portion of the code you can keep in your run blocking test scope. uh, that is how we test coroutines, like within we test the suspend functions within another coroutine. And you can use to mock the method, to mock the result of the method call. You can use any mocking framework. You can use Mockito or Mock-K. Better use Mock-K because Mockito has certain limitations with Kotlin components, like Kotlin objects, extension functions, and all, which Mock-K doesn't have, and it actually enables the developers to test various Kotlin components like top level functions, Kotlin objects, private functions very easily. So use Mock-K for mocking, and for actually collecting your flows, we can use this Turbine library. So I got this snippet from the Turbine library GitHub page. So you can see that it's a simple library which you can use. You can see in the example that you simply create a flow, and in the test you can expect the items to be emitted as they are. So you can in with expect item, you can expect an item from the flow. You just write this method expect item, and you will just get an item. And expect complete means your flow emission has been complete. So the dependency is also listed. You need to first include it, and then you can begin testing the flow collection with Turbine library. And moving forward to some of the good reads with Kotlin Flow. So here you can go through the Mindocs flow guide. So they have couple of examples, different examples where they talk about Kotlin flow. That is one of the good read which I would want to recommend. Second is for testing flow. I would like to recommend this link where we have different things covered for testing flow, and like even testing the errors in flow, and even testing channels. And the last thing which I would want to recommend is, this is the official Android developer documentation. So you can go through it, and it has this additional resources page where it has some really good examples, and yeah, code labs as well for learning Kotlin coroutines as flow and flow. So these are that was the end of the presentation. Hope you all are geared up to use Kotlin Flow in your projects. Thank you.